this portion that did seem very gay to me, as somebody who isn't bothered by this stuff, like I think you should represent, I'm cool with gay people and everybody, but like it did seem overly gay. For a while there, about, I don't know, 8, 10 years ago, the Bud Light Lime commercials, every friend group was
Right.
one white person, one black person, one Asian person, one Mexican person, one gay person, right? It was just like it was the United Nations. And it's just, which is, I don't care. Like I said,
Right.
this doesn't bother me, folks, but it is something, it's just so obvious what they're doing. What did you think of this whole controversy about the Olympic opening ceremonies going on? And so a bunch of Christians thought that it was basically making fun of the Last Supper. I understand people thinking that. And then apparently, because the Olympics, it's a Greek tradition, it was more basically talking about something going on with the Greek gods, which honest, I don't even say I want to say I don't care. I understand if some Christians were offended by it. I do think this though. They certainly really seem to gay that up. And look, I understand it's Paris. I understand it's France. There's art, there's culture, there's ballet. And by the way, this is coming from somebody who has not watched 1 second of the Olympics. I'm sure the opening ceremonies were like 3 hours long. There was some cool stuff and LeBron James and flags and
Yeah.
outfits. And this portion that did seem very gay became the real thing that everybody's talking about. I don't know how even big of a deal it was in terms of the whole opening ceremonies, but it did seem to me, as somebody who isn't bothered by this stuff, like I think you should represent, I'm cool with gay people and everybody, but like it did seem overly gay. You know? Is that
I
fair to
watched
say?
well, I watched a good chunk of it. First of all, Celine Dion was amazing. I mean, she
Okay.
brought the house down and at the end, and she's, going through a rough time, physically. So she's got that stiff person disease or whatever it's called. So that was
Yes.
really cool. But yeah, look, I'm like you. I don't get offended easily by anything. And so making fun of anything is not something that's going to, turn me off. I thought it would have been weird though, and really counterproductive if they would have been mocking the Last Supper painting
Yes.
like that and Christianity in general. Like I did agree that that would have been a really, really dumb play. But of course, but I also was watching that, and if you they had a catwalk and they had people on both sides and long lines, and they were doing. So to me, when I was watching it, I never thought, oh, they're mocking the Last Supper. That's not what I thought. And in fact, if you look at the video now, what they were mocking were paintings about Greek gods. There's a painting about Greek gods where they're doing all kinds of crazy things in the background. So I wish they would have come out and explained that right away. I think that was, first of all, from a PR standpoint, that was really stupid to not come out ahead of this, because as you said, that blew up right away, like instantly. I also think maybe people should just pump the brakes a little bit before we make definitive statements about what something is when we're not sure. Like, I don't know. I mean, I
Yes.
know that in this age, that's a wish. That's a dream that won't happen. In terms of, yes, you're right. There was a lot of that to me. If you were going to criticize, and again, I don't care about that, but if that's a thing that bothers you, that there's trans and gay people being represented in all kinds of flamboyant ways, then fine, criticize that, right? But don't criticize something that really wasn't even the intent of what they were doing. And in fact, now that they've put it out, you can see they were making fun of these paintings, or not making fun. They were reimagining, let's say, these paintings about Greek gods since the Olympics started in Greece, and we have that tradition. So I find it hard when these things come up to talk about in one regard, because I am so removed from the people who would get offended by
Me
something
too.
on either side, that it's
Yeah.
just really hard for me to summon that kind of outrage, like about any, like maybe that's why this is called Everybody Settle Down, because it's just really hard for me to get really fired up about any kind of commentary or point of view that mocks another point of view,
Right. And to
especially when
me,
it wasn't even what they were saying it was. That's the other
right.
thing.
And I get that. And that's a huge part of this, that hey, what you thought they were doing, even though I understand why you took it as a shot at the Last Supper, which would have been wrong, I agree with. It wasn't really that. But on the other side, I do understand when people say some of this stuff with the gender, with the trans, is being kind of just shoved into our faces. I do understand that argument. And just let me be clear that I'm all for anybody being who you are, and I do think representation matters. But I do think sometimes, like when you look at commercials and some TV productions and representation somewhere, it does seem like, and I'll speak right to the trans stuff. I said I think everybody would be better off if we talked less about the trans issue. If it truly affects 0.5%, whatever the number is, 0.5% of the population. So we're talking about what, 1 out of 200 people. I feel like the media oxygen it gets is like 50% of all conversations, right? So I do think we talk about it way too much, but I understand if everywhere you look there's like a trans person, like that's also not real life. If it's really 0.5% of the population, I don't think you necessarily have to have it everywhere in our face all the time. And so I do understand people on the
Yeah.
right kind of saying, can we just cool it with this also? I get that.
I do too. I think both sides overreact to each other.
Yes.
And it's like, and so it just becomes a thing that it, it takes on an outsized importance. And I don't think that really benefits us as a society. I think it's important. It's an important issue, particularly around what we do with children. And there's all kinds of states passing bans on that, and who's allowed to participate in what sports. I think those are all legitimate political
Mhm.
issues, but I don't think that it is as big of a deal in the day-to-day lives of most people as either side makes it out to be. And I do think that look, part of the argument of conservatives that I do agree with is what you were saying. This obsession that parts of the left have, and let's be honest, liberals control or have a lot of influence in Hollywood and in a lot of this media we're
Mhm.
consuming. And I think that obsession, like you see it even something like Star Wars, and the way they're so obsessed with, oh, it has to be we need female characters, we need diverse points of view. How about making something that's fucking good? Like, can we start with that as our North Star? Like, I'm going off on a tangent here, but if you like, let's start by making something that is the highest quality film show that we can produce. And then let's not worry so much about, well, we have to have every single group represented in this exact proportion on screen and off screen. It just, to me, is part of the reason that the critiques of the Democratic Party and some of the liberalism in particular do hold some validity, because it's like, why are we so obsessed with these things, right? To an outsized degree. I totally get that argument, and I agree with it. Now, is it going to make me not want to watch the Olympics or boycott because of it? No, I'm not going to get that outraged about it. But I totally agree with the argument. And I think what bothers me about it is when it starts, because I'm a big fan of movies, TV, and when it starts seeping into the quality of the show, I
Yeah.
really think and Disney, I think this. I'm thinking of the Star Wars example because of the Acolyte show and what they have said publicly about Star Wars. Like, why can't they say we're going to make something that's really great, and we don't really care what race or ethnicity the directors, the actors, the producers, the writers are. What we're going to focus on is making great content. Like, if they said that, I would be like, yeah. But instead, that's not the direction that we go. And I think art is worse for it with the, again, it's different than reaching out and trying. Communities have been marginalized, and it's fair to point that out, and it's fair to seek representation and to reach out to different communities. But that's different than being obsessed with it. And
Mhm.
I think we have veered too far down the road of being obsessed with it.
Yeah, and it's as somebody who, when I say I don't care, I do try to find the comedic value in a lot of these things. It goes back to, first of all, I saw this the first time I recognized this was, I remember back in the day, this is about 20 years ago. I'm covering press conferences at Michigan State University. And you would see this in higher education. If they had any type of big press conference, even if it was for sports, if it was for announcing a new football coach or a new athletics director, they would have every single ethnicity represented on that stage, right? I mean, to a point where it was like there'd be 10 people. It was like man, woman, Asian, Latino. gay person. What I mean, like it was so obvious. And then also, I always joke about the Bud Light Lime commercials, right? For a while there, about I don't know, 8, 10 years ago, the Bud Light Lime commercials, every friend group was
Right.
one white person, one black person, one Asian person, one Mexican person, one gay person, right? It was just like it was the United Nations. And it's just which is I don't care. Like I said,
Right.
this doesn't bother me, folks, but it is something, it's just so obvious what they're doing.
Right. It is. And it's like you watch a Netflix show and it's Netflix, I think, is one of the worst. It's like every show you have to have every friend group has to be represented by every. And look,
Yes.
if it's organic, fine, right? And if it works, fine. But I think that shouldn't be your primary focus. Your primary focus should be making great art. And
Mhm.
if it happens to be a story that involves gay people or trans people or 15 different races for people from 40 different countries, that's great. That's great. But if not, that's okay too. It's okay to, like if we had a story that was about, I don't know, that was set in Africa in the 1850s. I wouldn't expect it to be a cast that had a lot of white people. Do you know what
Sure.
I mean? And like,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be outraged that it didn't. We have to use some common sense here. And so look, I'm with conservatives on this, man. This stuff has gone off the extreme. And look, a lot of it is not that serious at the end of the day in terms of like, I'm not gonna you know, go out and pick at Netflix. But to me, I'm like you, it's more funny to me. It's more like amusing that we see this so much in our culture now.
Yeah, and I will say this though, as I flip, because 99% of what I've said has been against the left on this. But I will say the right also takes it too far. When you're offended that the Little Mermaid is black, right? Like who gives a crap?
Yes.
A
Yep.
mermaid can be any race. Like also don't be stupid with things like that also, right? It's fine. Okay.
Yes. I
Let's
totally agree with you.
end
Both I think that the point of the story is both sides are crazy.
correct. Correct.